Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Climate Confident Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Constantin. Constantin, welcome to the podcast. I should mention that this is a special sponsored episode of the podcast, sponsored by Siemens, and Constantin is with Siemens. So, Constantin, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Tom. Hi, everyone, and thanks for welcoming me to this podcast. So, I'm Constantin, Global Head of Energy Performance Services, which is basically a smart retrofit business for building and infrastructure. And, maybe two words about myself. I've worked in the last 20 years in the energy sector, power generation, grids, microgrids, and now in the building sector. And I've worked in different parts of the world. So I could see very much different market realities, in India, in Europe countries, in US, in South America.
Great. And we should also say that part of the reason for this episode is that the Smarter E event is coming up later this month of June in Munich, and Siemens are going to be presenting there. And are you going to be at that event, Constantin?
Yeah, I'm going to be at that event. And I do think, by the way, this is a great event where we look at, the energy chain more holistically. This is not only building, this is not only grid, this is really an integrated view of the energy systems, which for me is very much needed today.
And it's a big event, right?
It's quite big events. You're gonna have, we can post the details on number of guests and speakers and so on, but it's a very big event, very lively. And obviously there's Siemens very present there, but a lot of other companies, obviously.
Okay. And we're talking today a lot, we're going to be talking today a lot about industrial decarbonization. So can you tell people listening what you think are the biggest challenges industries face when they are trying to decarbonize?
Yeah, and maybe let's start with the macro picture and then really deep dive into industry in particular. I think really, now there is, whether that's industry or other customer segments, there is a high sense of urgency that starts to be perceived. We all know that we have on one side to protect the planet, but also our consumers are changing their behaviors. And that means the industry in particular have to change. But not again, industry is one segment. There are other examples that are also in universities, in campuses, and infrastructure where things are moving forward. And I think for the industry in particular, and we as Siemens, we are the first. We eat our own food dog, as we say. We wanna basically test those things ourselves and be the role model there. So on one side, I have to say, we have to look at scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and that's already a big challenge because, with electrification, integration of renewables and smart technologies, which one do you choose and how do you actually scale it throughout your facilities? So the scaling and the speed is one of the key challenge, how to get the speed that is necessary. And then the other thing is looking at scope 3, to be honest, because very often 70 to 80% of your emissions come from scope 3. So how do you ensure that on one side you have scaling solutions on your scope 1 and 2? And how do you ensure that you put the right support, perhaps, or guidelines, or even select your suppliers in order to meet your scope 3 emissions targets? And by the way, just as a side note, and I find it interesting for industries, it's interesting to see that we have actually a lot of companies that committed to net zero targets or carbon neutral targets.
Mhm.
I think we have 60% of Fortune 500 companies that's committed to targets by at least 2050, and this number is probably growing every day. So today might be 64, tomorrow 65, but 20% of those companies are on track. So again, back to the topic of speed, that is extremely important. How do we speed up the process and how do we make sure that those commitments are more than commitments and nice say but become reality?
Okay. And how are companies decarbonizing? What are you seeing them doing there? What are kind of best practices?
Yeah, so for me, we have very different type of industries that we are supporting for decarbonization. And once again, I'll start with Siemens because it's also always about how do we do it
Mhm.
ourselves. We take a big company like us, starting with again our scope 1 and 2. We have very different facilities. We have on one side offices, on the other side campuses, and manufacturing.
Mhm.
And if you say this is almost three segments within one company, and there are very different ways to approach the decarbonization for those three subsegments. And by the way, that's going to apply as well to other customers. The basics of the basic is remove gas consumption on the outside or any type of fuel consumption that you have on your facilities. Because if you electrify, you have the optionality of basically buying renewable energy. But if you consume gas and fuel on site, then you really have local emissions. So this is for sure a bottleneck you have to remove.
Mm.
Now it could be simple. It could be just I remove, I replace my boiler to an electrical boiler and or heat pumps, and everything is okay. But very often you have to optimize the whole systems while you do that. So first, very much looking at the process, electrification as a first layer. But again, I would call it smart electrification to do it faster. The other thing is for me digitalization,
Right.
because I think most of the time, I mean, and I mean this digitalization in two ways. Most of the time, this digitalization is linked to a reactive way to manage your facilities. It's looking at how is the temperature, how is the flow, how is the ventilation. And by the way, ventilation and heat and cool is maybe 70-80% of the consumption. And basically, you try to optimize that with different factors. But more and more digitalization helps us to have new use cases. The use case that we have exemplified with University of Birmingham is actually also applicable to offices and campuses of Siemens and our companies. And this is a use case that is around space management. And I give just this example just to give a flavor of what digitalization helps us to achieve. In that case, this is trying to utilize user-centric data in order to decide how to steer a building. So it's not only I'm looking at temperature, flow, and typical physics of the building,
Mhm.
but I'm looking at how the user is utilizing the building. And taking data of the user, so understanding how the user is behaving in these buildings, I can also decide to heat, cold, close down part of the buildings or actually utilize it differently. So space utilization is important, has an impact. And of course, then you can make smart decisions on how do you steer your workforce or your employees into your facility. And then the last piece of obviously is also renewables, making sure that you integrate renewables as much as possible. Seems simple. You have a roof, you should put a PV on the roof, but then how do you manage the roof? And how do you understand that this is also integrating and affecting the grid? And is there things you can play to actually benefit from cost, a better cost position, but also make the grid benefit from the way you consume and the way you operate? So these are the three elements I would say basic. There are more, of course, but I just put in, on purpose, three main blocks, and that's scope 1 and 2. And when it comes to scope 3, once again, that's for me the very first challenge for scope 3 is have the right data transparency, auditable data transparency. Understand first of all where is the emission coming from,
Mm.
and how is it generated, and by whom. So already that is already a first element where digitalization helps as well quite a bit. But then on top of that, there is the topic of helping our own suppliers to decarbonize. And as Siemens, that's what we do as well. So we propose our product services, not only in my specific space of energy performance services, but also on the industry space, on the broader smart infrastructure space. We ensure that actually we can support with our own knowledge our supply chain. But this journey, as I said, is a longer one to go through.
Interesting. From your perspective, Constantine, are there any sectors that are currently leading the way in decarbonisation, and what are they doing right?
Yeah, let me start, with the macro picture on that one. I was mentioning before briefly universities with the partnership we are doing with University of Birmingham. I do think first universities is a very important. I mean, higher education is a very important segment to focus on. They are part of the ecosystem. They help us innovate, and that's very important to go faster.
Mhm.
And in particular, when it is about having a living lab and seeing really how the things are really working and in advance before applying that to industries. And again, we have good partnerships in running with universities. One of them, which is a highlight from my perspective, is University of Birmingham, when we worked in particular on the IoT technologies, including the space management type of topics I was mentioning before. So they are part of the ecosystem. And as I was saying, ecosystem key to actually accelerate. When we go now to industries, we certainly see a lot of industries moving forward right now. I would just highlight out of experience food and bev and automotive because we see a movement. I would not say that they are the first, but they are very much moving very fast right now. Food and bev, I mean, obviously because they have a direct relationship to customers, gets also their consumer behavior changing, and so they have to do something.
Hmm.
And it starts with transparency on their carbon emission, but it's also a question of decarbonizing themselves, their own operation, and of course, there again, the topic of scope 3 is important for them. So we do see great references. I was mentioning in other panels recently the topic of Heineken that has been basically announced for the first time in the WEF, World Economic Forum, in January.
Hmm.
It's basically a partnership that we have been, and again, I'm talking about partnership. So this is a customer, but we work together as partners to decarbonize their facilities. And so here we talk about 200 sites. We take care of a portion of it, but we definitely give advices for the entire scope. And that's for me one of the visible example of what food and bev is experiencing right now. The topic of automotive that I was mentioning before, same reason, also a very high visibility of activities, so reputation extremely important.
Hmm.
They first all go into electrification, which is, by the way, one of the things we partnered there with them because we support the electrification infrastructure.
Okay.
But on the other side, they decarbonize their industries and facilities. And the interesting part of it is, obviously, we have customers that are really expert in their own domain.
Mm.
So the way we approach it is not telling them exactly how to do everything. We really have to understand how the process works, how the manufacturing process works, what is important, so that we actually can manage the energy in the right way and then provide some tangible benefits. And by the way, a side note on that, we really help accelerate that, not only with technology, as I was explaining before, but the topic of business models is also very important. We do provide outcome based guaranteed performance, which in many cases help to have an OPEX driven business model rather than a CAPEX, which very often for some industries or even general customers, you don't always have the CAPEX to electrify, to go fast into your investment of decarbonization. And I think this is also something where we provide an extra value, once again, supporting an OPEX model,
Mm.
which is more digestible
Yeah.
than a full CAPEX model. So
Nice. Nice. Very nice. Are there any particular challenges in the automotive sector or the brewing sector, in Heineken's case, that these companies had that you helped them overcome?
yeah, with this is also, I mean, you will have different type of challenges. I mean, if you have a global company, let me take Heineken,
Mm.
and it would be very similar conclusions for automotive. We also, by the way, announced some partnerships recently on automotive. But for me, there is global company, multi-sites, and they have a certain type of challenges. And then you have more the local ones. So let me compare the local brewers with the large multi-sites brewery that you have like an Heineken.
Mm.
But if you take a global company, from my perspective, you can come with a great strategy and a great plan to decarbonize. That doesn't mean that your facilities and that your sites will follow you. Each site has its own organization, its own operation, and own priorities.
Mm.
Very, very often economic priorities and finance priorities. So how do you make sure that your targets becomes reality within your own organization? So it's not a technological challenge, but the first challenge for me is very much great to have a CEO decision, great to have, a strategic plan on how to decarbonize. But then when you hit the reality of what does that mean for the business on the multi-sites, and that's once again is valid in food and bev and others. So how do we make sure that we don't disrupt any operation while decarbonizing at speed? And how do we make sure that the stakeholders are in it and they really are part of the decarbonization program? And there I do think that in those global companies, we really work, I would say, from bottom to top and top to bottom. I would even say boiler to board and board to boiler, so that basically we can talk at different levels in the organization to make the different level understand, having the right language to explain what is it that we're doing. So I would put this challenge in particular. The other challenge for the smaller ones, I mentioned before the topic of the business model, the finance.
Hmm.
Again, industry, we talk a lot about those big names, but there is a lot of industries which are small, medium-sized enterprise that also need to decarbonize. And they deliver goods and products to larger ones. And there I do think that on top of really having the right solution and scalable and fast, they also need ways to finance it. Otherwise, they are not fast enough in the investment. So I do think that all those models like as a service models or finance models are very important. And for me, this is one of the levels we have to utilize much more. There is equity funds available focusing exactly on the topic of decarbonization, which we have to use. And Siemens are the first one. We are the first one to have SFS, Siemens Financial Services. We have this capability also to help our customers with finance models, whether that's debt or in certain cases equity. So again, question of culture, question of convincing all the organization, question of having fast and the right solution, and finally making sure that you have a finance topic that is considered from the beginning. So this for me are some challenges that we encounter, and we work with our customers partners to try to improve the situation there and accelerate once again.
Sure, sure. And you mentioned digitalization. Are there any aspects of that you'd like to highlight that are important?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there is a lot of aspects. You know that with new regulations, a lot of things are very critical on data. So who owns the data? How can we utilize the data? Is very important. Once again, we don't touch in industry and really the secrets of the production. We really look at in our case, decarbonization, energy utilities. So what is the energy provided?
Hmm.
But data privacy is a first very important topic. Second, the way we approach the topic in industries is with digital energy twin. So it's not connecting, I get all your data and then I will tell you something. We start with simulating, predicting different scenarios with virtual models of your systems. That helps us to overcome the topic of, hey, get me all your data. We first model your systems in, disconnected from your facilities. And then we really work together on different scenarios. But the model is always the same. Once you really create the model, you really have different ways to play with it before implementing anything on the reality. So data privacy, very important. Data access, very, very critical. But really the way to overcome that and go faster is to utilize digital energy twin and make sure that the virtual representation of a factory helps us to basically have different scenarios and work on that. And then the second topic is that we let, in certain cases, the whole model and all data being managed by the customer. So that's also possible. So that actually we don't interfere with that. But I have to say we are always in a challenge because if we can gather more data, we can learn more, we can learn faster. And we really have to discuss on what are the data that we want to make public and what are the data we cannot make public. It's more than a technical discussion, definitely. But when it comes to sustainability, and again, with the urgency of decarbonization, I do think that we need a certain layer of data being shared so that we can learn better and faster. So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is, of course, all the new applications that we can think of. We have a lot of applications that are data driven, up to AI, so up to artificial intelligence that supports faster deployment of applications,
Mm.
software in particular. But all of this still comes with a lot of questions and guardrail that we need to respect, and regulation is changing very, very fast. So we need to always observe that. Just as an example with AI, if a program is self-generated, who owns the IP? Who owns the program itself? That's just one of the questions we have to look at. So data privacy, data access, but also with AI, a lot of new questions also coming that we need to answer.
Right. Very good. Very good. When you talk about digital energy twins, kind of brings to mind movies like Avatar or Iron Man, where digital replicas play a crucial role. How are they used in real life industries to achieve decarbonization goals? And do you see any parallels to the kind of sci-fi portrayals?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, as an energy engineer of education, for me, this is like Avatar. I mean, I know that not for everybody, but for me, this is really a marvelous world. But let's be clear as well on what it is. It's definitely not a full 3D representations of your factory where you float around and see everything. Although we can do that, but when we talk about digital energy twin, we really talk about a digital representation of your energy assets, model of consumption, transmission, energy efficiency factors of your systems, but very precise on your energy assets. And this is more, a scheme. I mean, if you look at it, that looks really like a scheme and different functions and different graphs that helps you really first see how your system works. How does that work exactly? I mean, once again, once you have established the first model, you take historical data of a particular day or particular months, and you run your simulation. And that's something that you can do manually or automatically.
Mhm.
So that you can really see different configurations and get an optimal situation. And what it gives you is essentially as an outcome. Let's look at that as an outcome. It gives you how much cost you're going to have. If you want to change your planning of your factory, you want to, I don't know, produce a new car, or you want to have two shifts instead of one shift. How much more energy you're going to utilize? Is your infrastructure, transformer, grid allowing you to go to that level of peak of energy? Is your price or cost of energy being somehow higher, lower, and can you manage it in a smarter way? And by the way, we talk a lot about storage, but certain cases it's not only about storage, it's about planning in the right way, planning and optimizing your assets. So you can come with also ideas in the virtual world on we should control the assets differently, or we should change certain elements, even hardware of your systems will help you. Instead of a fixed speed, you go for variable speed, something that really fits to the exact energy need that you have. So all of this helps you very concretely to, number one, predict in advance how your energy carbon costs are going to look like. But number two, it gives you indication on operation strategies, control strategies, or different assets and replacements, different retrofits that you can do on your facility so that you can improve the outcome of it. And through that, you really have a very strong advisory tool that is something that we share and something that we co-build in certain cases with our customers so that we really have something that fits their need and defines different scenarios. And then we really can say, what is it that we want to do? And, I talked about the case of Heineken before. If you utilize a digital twin and you look at all the 200 sites, it might well be that you say it's better to implement the same small digital solution everywhere instead of doing a thorough net zero factory one after the other. In terms of speeds, sometimes you really can drive a different strategies because you understand better on the floor how this is working. So that's something that helps you also to strategize on your implementation plan, not only just the strategy plan for decarb, but how do you implement it and what do you take as the first priorities?
Fair, fair. Okay. Looking ahead, where do you see business opportunities in sustainability over the next 5, let's say, years?
Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, sustainability is, from my perspective, for sure going to be a big opportunity continuing going forward. Again, for the same topic,
Mhm.
The sense of urgency is there. I think there gotta be different developments. And again, there I will different people, even in Siemens, would answer differently this question.
Sure.
I personally think that there's going to be strong areas of development on one side. The grid interaction topic. We're not at the end of the story of how does the building behind the meter can interact in a smarter way with the grid, which, as we know, by the way, I do some advertisement for your other podcast with Sabine that explain, all the grid situation, the bottlenecks, and everything that you have around that. So how do we make sure that we have more and more solutions that are looking holistically at the energy systems and not only coming with large storage as the solution
Mm.
or hydrogen? The other topic that is very important is, for me, looking holistically at the sustainability within building. We spend 70 to 80% of our time within building. It's a global view. Of course, you would not have the same answer in Africa and in South America, etc. But we spend a lot of time in buildings. So I think more and more the topic of decarbonization and energy is coupled with quality of living within buildings. So how do we make sure that we have more and more integrated solution where health, security, and energy decarb is looked at holistically? So this is another one. And then I mentioned before artificial intelligence. I think we're going to have more and more cases where we utilize either data analytics or one step further artificial intelligence to go faster. We have some cases very simple, but also more complex. But a simple I could share is, for example, in a customer that has hundreds of facilities, the analysis of utility bills. In the past, you had an engineer combining everything, data analytics, etc. Today, you can say you upload everything to a chat GPT type of basically tool, and you ask questions,
Mm.
and you get directly answers on trends, on things that you were not seeing obviously in the past in a more traditional way. So that's just a little case, very pragmatic, very simple, but it's actually helping a lot. And then the other topic which we are doing is more on the control side. As an example, in data center, the cooling of data center is a huge energy consumer.
Mm.
And of course, it drives a lot of energy, and because of that, a lot of carbon, if at least you don't rely only on renewable energy. So the way we cool data centers moved much more from a more reactive mode. Once again, I measure and I decide, to something that is more data analytics, and purely data analytics and artificial intelligence tools decide what to do and does it very efficiently, but without a predictive model anymore. And so these are some trends. So grid integration, holistic view, energy and decarb. And then finally, the topic of artificial intelligence. So data analytics, large data, big data, and artificial intelligence. For me, these are large topics of, I would say, decarb sustainability that is really moving forward. And we're going to need that
Mm.
because, once again, we are pretty late in the transformation.
Yeah, we only have 5 years, 5.5 years to get to 2030. So yeah, that's hence the 5-year question. What advice, Constantine, would you give to companies that are just starting out on their sustainability journey?
Again, I think it's a lot of questions. We should look at it from very different angles. I would not undermine the topic of organization, mindset, culture, because no matter where we are, sharing a common goal and purpose is a huge opportunity, first for a company, for their own
Mm.
employees and for the own employees' engagement. It's a huge opportunity as well to position yourself in the markets. So for me, I'll start with this. And once again, as an energy engineer, I would have had the tendency to look at technology first, but I have to say here, it starts with that clear goal, clear commitment, clear purpose. And I think that's a key. And when we have that, it goes so fast. Even complex problems, it goes very, very fast. So leadership culture is a first pillar. The second is look really holistically at your systems, and really don't forget scope three. So really look at holistically, and where is it that we make the maximum impact the quickest. And there are a lot of companies that help also from this broad consulting to look at it more holistically. And then the last thing is, of course, come to Siemens. And I would say, we at least could really look together at your systems. And I do believe that the topic of digital and digital twin in particular is a key. It's a key element to go fast because you understand better concretely how it works. You can, thanks to that, you can convince different parts of your hierarchy and organization. So this is for me a very key element of the transformation.
Okay, makes sense. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Constantin. Is there any question I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
Yeah, I mean, so many questions, first of all, that you could have asked. But if there is one that is critical, I think, especially when it comes to exchanging together, for me, it's about what's the real challenge we have on the product side. So really we pull a lot of product in our solution. And, how do we make sure we touched upon that, but how do we make sure that we really work on our products in a better way with a circularity as part of it? And that's for me, one of the topics that is clear and very important, that we look at end to end, including recycling in our solution. Even if our business, or my business in my case, is very focused on decarbonization and energy, scope 1, scope 2, there is no way out at looking at the entire chain. So this is for me really one of the topics we could deep dive or take another podcast on that one.
Sure. Good, good, good. Constantine, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Yeah, for me, the best approach is to utilize LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, quite reactive on that. And if they reach out to me with specific questions, I or the communication team can also support answering those questions with pleasure.
And go to the Smarter E event in Munich and the
That's absolutely true. I forgot that one, but that's by the way absolutely correct. So if I have requests before, definitely that's a great opportunity to meet people.
Great. Super.
Um,
Constantine, that's been great. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks, appreciate it.